The sun rises in a slightly different place every day until a solstice reverses the Earth's tilt back into the opposite direction. This shift takes 3 days when the sun stops and rises in the same place each time, laying dormant, then is considered resurrected when it begins moving again after this macrocosmic symbol of death. As far back in time as we know, and much further even, Earthlings have built monuments to capture this yearly event for reasons we are still not entirely sure of. Stonehenge is centered to align with the sunrise on solstice, hence going into the warm light, and with sunset on the equinox, hence going into the cold dark. Machu Picchu does the same, with the solstice sun beaming through the peak opening only during these rare solar events. In Giza, we can see that the Great Pyramid actually has 8 sides for only 4 minutes a year during this time. Karnak of Egypt also captures the sun in the same area at the same time. The list goes on and on. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, Hovenweep Castle in Utah, Menzera in Malta, the ominous Gate of the Sun in Tiwanaku. Even the gigantic 2D ground drawings that can only be seen from the skies of Nazca are all lined up in this fashion. And of course we have the face and temples in Cydonia, the otherwise flattest and most level region on Mars.
Hold on, wait a second. Did he just say that there are celestially mathematical monuments of purposeful geometric codes on Mars, like in Egypt? I thought it was just a face.
It turns out there is a lot more to this enigma than was let loose after the failed attempted cover-up by NASA following its accidental announcement about it. For those of you new here, NASA was busted adding reverse contrast filters and false shadows to make the face appear flat. Digital artists and geologists all over the world spotted this rushed forgery of its own image, creating the most embarrassing cover-up arguably in government-funded history. But the face not only has perfectly mirrored symmetry, a technique seemingly only found on the stone and gold faces in Egypt, but it is not exactly alone up there. Just like the Sphinx in Giza, the Mars face has many friends. There are indeed structures unimaginably ancient that line up with the face in accordance to its solstice. Yes, exactly like humans have been doing on Earth forever. We will look at the unignorable facts in a moment because the facts lead us to only a few admittedly outlandish conclusions. Outlandish, but necessary because the anomaly is right there looking at us and waiting. One theory is that advanced humanoid life began on Mars millions of years ago, and a few, very few, jumped ship before their planet was destroyed, as we know that Mars was indeed once habitable and now shows clear signs of nuclear detonation. Another option is that of panspermia, that a godlike race of humanoid beings plants their likeness onto many planets they see fit for reasons unknown, but possibly for experimentation or soul farming and or soul growing. And a third option suggests that emerging intelligent life on all physical planets sprouts similar life forms due to the requirements of the environment, thus humanoid. And then there is another hypothesis, an option so unbelievable that it shakes even the most fringe of theorists down to their core. But after looking at the facts in stone, doing the math and witnessing the obviously belligerent geometry in plain sight, this final option just can't be ignored. Now, let's see if we can make sense of something that can't possibly logically make sense. What is this familiar face trying to tell us? So, before the Egyptians found the Great Pyramids that were built long before them, the head of the Sphinx was that of a lion. This is why the head is so small now. They were smart enough not to tamper with the pyramids, but decided to make the Sphinx look like themselves, because, hey, even high priests carry a little ego. But the lion's face does not line up exactly with the constellation of Leo anymore. You see, the Earth has a very slow secondary wobble that takes thousands of years to cycle. But the lion-headed Sphinx did, however, line up perfectly when it was built about 13,000 years ago. And remember this point because the movement of these planets is how we determine something's state of build. On Mars, we have a collaboration of geometry just like all listed above. There is a cluster of three-sided pyramids on the left that have been called the city. The face at the center, of course, and this weird giant wall off to the right. When we draw a ruler's line from the center of the city to the top of the wall, it runs straight through the eyes of the face. Starting from the same point at the city center, drawing a line to the bottom of the wall runs a line directly under the mouth of the face on Mars, creating this geometrical frame. Here is the weird part. We certainly recognize this kind of work. Our ancestors have been doing shit like this for thousands of years and possibly many more. It looks like the viewpoint being the city within the pyramids would be a hot spot for a solstice sunrise because as you look toward the face on Mars, perfectly boxed around it is that wall. It acts as a sunscreen and borders the face at the center, kind of like an artificial eclipse with the face at the center. This would be an absolutely breathtaking spectacle if the sunrise on the solstice happened right there on the horizon behind the wall and the face. But the Martian solstice sun doesn't rise there, at least anymore, because the last time the sun fell perfectly down that straight line was just over 500,000 years ago. This just so happens to be when the Martian landscape was habitable for life. So, like back working the zodiacs to find when the Sphinx was built, as its head would have faced Leo, we can do the same with this ancient solstice, but unfortunately with a much longer calendar. We can roughly speculate as to what our ancestors did here on Earth around the time when they lived amongst these monuments. But 500,000 years ago, dude, forget about it. It sucks to say that we will never get a clear picture of what the fuck was going on up there that damn long ago. All we know is that we did it here too. We do, however, have a couple hints to go from though, due to other anomalies in this same region called Cydonia. Below the face, there is a five-sided pyramid, the top of which this pentagon shape is pointed directly under the chin of the face, leaving us an ancient clue here. First off, drawing our ruler line through the center and through the face, you end your line at true north, something that we are aware that our ancient ancestors also did frequently with their monuments. Looking at this star shape, we might even be reminded of the dimensions of a human form as demonstrated by Da Vinci with his Vitruvian Man. Another case of squaring the circle. Da Vinci was surely in tune with our ancients who often did the same. It does more than just remind us of this geometry, because sure enough, when superimposed on each other, it is an exact match. The dimensions and form of these builders may have been humanoid, to say the least. This five-sided pyramid, known as the DNM structure, also clearly and accurately points to other main structures in this complex. The top left corner pointing to the city center, where the solstice sunrise is to be seen. And the top right corner points to this round yet pointed looking structure that, well, frankly, looks like a titty. This has been called Tholos. Along with the geometry of these actual structures, there also seems to be a mathematical sequence of progression captured in the distance between them. If we consider the center of the city to the outer structure as one unit of measurement, it is also one unit of measurement to the opposite side. That lines up with the five-sided pyramid, making 2 units. Then that distance to the face is double that, making 4. And then the distance to the next monument, being the wall that frames the face, is double that, making 8. This is a sequence we are familiar with. Compounding duplication, kind of like the splitting of cells. 1, 2, 4, 8. It is important to keep in mind that all of these structures, and also more than I can cover in an appropriate time span, are all located within a few kilometers of each other. Out of the 150 million kilometers available on Mars, these unique structures are neighbors. Each one of these anomalies would be strange on their own and isolated, but they are all together and in sync with each other. This lends credence to them having a meaning resembling a message in code rather than just a site of ritual. We might be able to use this for comparison to Earth's similar structures and their purposes. But what is not clear is whether this spectacle is meant to be seen from the air, like our Nazca lines, or seen from the ground, like in Karnak. Because very brilliantly laid out here, it seems to be both. Was this an accident? Or some really, really long game type of thinking ahead? As we know, the pyramids of Giza were meant to be a permanent record of our place in the cosmos, as its math illustrates equations representing our solar system. In Göbekli Tepe, the monuments instead are a warning of dire catastrophe, being the Great Flood, but also hints that these things happen to the surface of our planet from time to time, and for us to be vigilant. So we have two completely different messages sent from the past with only these two examples alone. Dare we even speculate as to the purpose or message of what is on Mars? Because despite obviously being very wind eroded and dulled down from the eons it has seen, we can tell that they were built to stay, and they have for over 500,000 years. Perhaps a bit of mythology will come in handy for getting a grip here. Cultures have associated Mars with war for a long time. Romans thought of it as a war between dualities, wielding a masculine energy. The ancient Chinese used it as a symbol for the grief that comes from murder and battle, but also representing the holding of power. In India and Babylon, it was the personification of fear and combat, like the fight or flight response. The only culture seeming to not sing a similar tune was, oddly enough, Egypt, who saw Mars as a symbol of royalty. The personification of Mars has Horus, a sky god of kingship. Horus was also closely associated with the word horizon, or more specifically, the sunrise of the horizon. This is a huge coincidence we will come back to later. But all of these cultures depict Mars with war, except the one that most closely resembles its structural layout in Cairo of Egypt. This channel certainly has a reoccurring theme of science swooping in to back up ancient mythology, because we in fact have an ample amount of evidence of wars on Mars. War of the worst kind, in fact, because this planet has clear signs of nuclear war. The gargantuan gouges chunked out of the surface that dwarf even the Grand Canyon were once believed to be from water erosion. As we got better and closer looks, we found that they did not have the signatures of water flow, but seemed to be spastic like lightning. This led to a hypothesis of cosmic plasma blasts, like the static electricity between planets, which still remains an option, but has mostly been debunked in many different ways since then. It wasn't until we could examine samples of Mars in person that a clearer picture began to emerge as to how this planet got so tore up from the floor up, because even the stripped away atmospheric makeup has a haunting signature. Mars is thick with elements like xenon-129, krypton, and UTH radioisotopes, elements that we have here on Earth just as of recently, because we created them. These isotopes are only made in a thermonuclear reaction, i.e. an atomic bomb, and these simply do not occur naturally. So something very terrible happens to this entire planet. The planet also emits methane, which is weird because we don't see any plants or farts going on up there. Could it be that during this war period, people went underground, as it seems many celestial bodies have recently turned up to be a lot more empty than we were taught? And if so, could this be the message or warning? Because sure, Earth has floods, fires, meteors, solar flares that fuck us up real bad enough to restart written history from scratch. But Mars, though, this is where it gets scary. Scary because it seems like they killed themselves in that oldest game of mutual assured destruction. You kill me, I'll kill you back type shit. We have not come close to the nuclear destruction that Mars has endured, but we have come close to this kind of planetary suicide. And guess what year it was when the bulk of UFOs started showing up on Earth? You guessed it. Ever since splitting the atom. These things have been everywhere and no longer ignorable, as we have seen especially recently. And I don't know who is behind the UAPs, and I don't think they are Martian Agarthians, although that would be fun. Oh, it would make a great movie plot. Great sci-fi. But whoever busted us setting off nuclear weapons showed the fuck up and didn't hide, because they were probably around when Mars went through its suicidal destruction. And I don't think they will let it happen again. In fact, that's not just a hunch. It has happened. Nuclear facilities poised and ready to hit the button during the Cold War indeed had a day that shit got real. They engaged the equipment and turned on the targeters and radar shit or whatever, I don't know. And they showed up on radar and in plain sight to hundreds of witnesses, not hiding shit. They floated up, knocked out all the power, knocked out all the generators, and also all of the backup generators right in front of our military's face. We felt like children. And be it sounding impossible, the same thing happened on the other guy's side too. At the same time, it wasn't even a secret. The story ain't covered up. It made news, but I mean, oh, you know the drill. We forgot about it. But coming back to these structures and their possible message, it now is perhaps more clear. This area called Cydonia is strikingly flat and smooth. It seems it was a rare spot that this nuclear war did not completely destroy. I hope we can pay better attention to this detail than the NASA ignorantly has, because if we are not careful, the same could very well happen to us, and unfortunately, not just us. But unlike a little pollution and CO2 emissions, nuclear war can eviscerate an entire atmosphere of a planet, leaving it no longer habitable for anything at all. And perhaps just like Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe, this message from the face on Mars is a warning of what has happened and can very well happen again. And who is this message to? Well, that face looks a lot like us, and it is facing our direction. So another connection to Earth structures is staggering. Many of our ancient monuments align with the Sirius star system known as Orion's Belt, most notably in Giza, of course. Well, it turns out that Mars is close enough a neighbor to Earth that we share the same sky. And there must be something very special about this star system, because sure enough, the main structures in Cydonia are mapped out in the same pattern. Whoever built this shit on Mars also concerned themselves with the constellations just as we do. And possibly even more so, because they got us beat in this regard. Several surrounding stars of the same celestial spot are included in the additional surrounding structures on Mars. This is astounding. And what is more unbelievable is that they not only beat us in that respect, but these buildings in Cydonia are gigantic compared to what we have here. The face itself is about 2.5 miles across. The entire base of the Great Pyramid has a coverage of only 13 acres, which is huge, don't get me wrong, but the Mars face is drastically larger than we can imagine. By looking at it from space, that is, because no one's sending rovers up there. As well as the pyramids are over 1 mile high, again, dwarfing anything that we've built here on Earth. Could this be because there's less gravity on Mars and perhaps it's easier to do?
can only speculate. Being that these things are huge and easily seen from space, this certainly seems to be on purpose. That is, that we can see it from the air. And I think this answers our prior question as to whether or not it was meant to be a message to intelligent life not local to the Martian landscape. Now, it would be nice to visit this place by rover, and it would be very easy to do so, as flat and easily accessible as it is. And this is with plenty of public funded interest in putting pressure on NASA to do so. Because, well, this is provable now. We pay them to exist. They work for us, the people. And we want confirmation in either direction. Even if they can disprove it by going there, well, then do it. But they won't. And they pretty much confirmed the authenticity of these structures by accidentally releasing that forged image with the filters. But ever since this discovery, NASA has outright refused to send anything to that particular region called Cydonia, and went as far as to even have the government make it illegal for all nations and civilians. This is very frustrating, and it gets worse. We have orbiters over Mars taking pictures all the damn time. Every time it passes over Cydonia, they shut off the cameras, and they have an excuse every time. Sometimes it's for updates and software, and sometimes it glitches out, and a dozen other excuses. But the only time they have these malfunctions is when passing over this one spot, Cydonia. What is going on here? What is there to hide, if not the message itself? Imagine what we could do with fresh, updated images with modern cameras, considering what we can conclude with all of this old-ass footage. I mean, there is a lot of new, stunningly sharp, close-up images of Mars nowadays, none of which are anywhere close to Cydonia in location. So we can't get a sharper look. But, and we are about to get weird here, we can't go to this planet in person yet. There does seem to be, however, some who can visit this place, that is, according to the CIA. And you guessed it, remote viewing strikes again. We have covered in several previous videos the usage of remote viewers by the government. So let's skip all that background. But in recently declassified CIA documents that you can read for yourself, when given the coordinates of 40.89 north and 9.55 west, the remote viewers saw the same thing. One of which is quoted as saying, "I got an oblique view of a ... pyramid or a pyramid form. It's very high. It's kind of sitting in a large depressed area." Well, it should be no surprise by now that these coordinates given to the viewers were that of Cydonia on Mars, described perfectly by multiple compartmentalized clairvoyants who also reported seeing tall humanoid figures, slowly doing work on something they just didn't have the vocabulary to describe, much less understand. It's also worth noting that these remote viewers working for the CIA did not have access to these books and these pictures at the time of their remote viewing. So we have two isolated incidents that coincide with each other eerily well. We mentioned earlier similarities of Cydonia to the layout and style of geometry that is laid out in Egypt. And that brought up our old friendo, old buddy of Thoth, that we call Horus. In ancient Egypt, Mars was known as Horus of the horizon, and despite being a falcon, was often depicted as orange and red like the planet. The falcon was a symbol of the rising and setting sun. Falcons hover before they strike, kind of like the sun set during solstice, or the sunrise during solstice. But Horus had an earlier glyph though. Before this form, he was called Heru, which means face, or face on the horizon. By the time the Greeks got around to doing their thing, Heru became hero, which at the time meant not quite a god, but still above mankind. All this connection so far comes from mythology, so it certainly cannot be proven to connect with Cydonia. But there is another tidbit that seems to solidify a connection. Cairo, the site of the two greatest pyramids, was originally named El Kahira. Originally named El Kahira, Elkahira. Sorry guys, I've only seen it read. I haven't heard it said. This word is an Arabic word meaning the planet Mars. Richard Hoagland comments on this. Again, what were the random possibilities that there would exist two isolated worlds, both with pyramids and sphinxes? And now that the one site on this planet where the most perfect, most archetypal form still stands, Cairo, would also form the key linguistic bridge that links those two worlds. A while back, Zecharia Sitchin made it clear to us that we often translate ancient writings to fit our current viewpoint of the past, and accidentally lose much of the original meaning this way, something we very much do with the Bible now. A good example is the story of Hercules being a watered-down version of Gilgamesh. This comes in handy to know because the Babylonian creation myth called the Enuma Elish seems vague to say the least, but there is a passage that states, Nibiru shall hold the crossings of heaven and earth. He who the midst of the sea restlessly crosses, let crossing be his name, who controls the midst. Okay. This was enough for Sitchin to assume that a planet from an outer orbit would sometimes elliptically cross paths with Earth's orbit. And although Sitchin was a brilliant scholar, and there is most likely a 10th giant planet, which would be subject to its own video, this elliptical crossing is very, very unlikely. So what else could this ominous passage in the Enuma Elish be referring to? Well, a man named Temple, author of The Serious Mystery, comes in to lend us a hand with this loose translation. Let us look at the Egyptian language again. We find the word Neb is extremely common and is used in many combinations and means Lord. With further ado, let me make it clear that I believe the Sumerian Nibiru to be derived from the Egyptian Neb-Hiru. If we treat hero in its older Egyptian sense as the sun, then descriptions of Neb-Hiru in the Babylonian Enuma Elish could read as a perfect description of Neb-Hiru, the Lord of the Sun. Nibiru shall hold the crossings of heaven and earth. So there was a planet that crossed orbits with Earth once upon a time, and that planet must have been fairly neighborly. And so reading that, there seems to be a sort of so-called hero's journey taking place here. And we might remember our last video, Thoth of Agartha, regarding how ascended masters used pyramids to become one with the stars. And I feel like this connection, plus the similar layouts of Cairo and Mars, can't be ignored. After all, they have the same name, don't they? But speaking of Sitchin and all this Sumerian shit, let's read a bit about the first arrival of some strange teachers of mankind. An animal endowed with reason who was called Oannes. An animal endowed with reason who was called Oannes. This being in the daytime used to converse with men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them insight into letters and sciences of every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws, and explained to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of earth and showed them how to collect fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften manners and humanize mankind. When the sun set, it was the custom of this being to plunge again into the sea and abide all night in the deep, for he was amphibious. After this, there appeared other animals like Oannes, Oannes, of which Berosus promised to give an account when he comes to the history of the kings. There were afterward other kings. The number amounted to 10 kings. The term of their reign was 120 Sari. So maybe it's Sarai. It was also from Abydos that the crucial datum came. Now a Saras is esteemed to be 3,600 years. Using the sum of the reigns of these 10 kings, the device used to reinforce the total span of years, and adjusting his calculations to allow for the uncertainty introduced by the consistent reference to the deluge, Sitchin arrived at a figure for when Oannes, or Enki, first appeared, and he appeared 445,000 years ago. He then writes, Hoagland writes, I found my missing 500,000 years. And of course, that is going to remind us of the first 2 points made in the body of this video, that Mars was habitable 500,000 years ago, as well as the structures would have lined up with the solstice sunrise on Mars, also 500,000 years ago. The same time that this amphibious human being decides to show up and start teaching mankind, or at least the primordial stem that was mankind at the time. Our mainstream certainty about civilization starting in Sumer from nothing gets thrown out more and more as we learn more and more about who we are. It seems that the story has many versions and is far more complex than we could have conceived with fiction and, well, in lies in school and history. What might be important to note here before this next bit is that Mars, like Antarctica, is extremely sterile as an environment. If you were to create a new species, as might be done in a lab, tampering with DNA and whatnot, going straight to Earth would be dangerous considering the amount of germination going on. Pollen is bad enough on our human sinuses, so little gray people would be sneezing way too much to create hybrids to fiddle with genitalia. I guess they wouldn't be little gray guys considering we're talking about the remote viewers reported tall, dark figures, and the Anunnaki, of course, were also giants. But nevertheless, maybe they got bad sinuses, I don't know. A planet that is flourishing less, as counterproductive as it sounds, would be a great pit stop, so to speak, a place to do your work completely unbothered. But at this point, I am reminded of the word Anunnaki, which loosely translates to from heaven to earth came. And by loosely translates, I mean, well, it doesn't really translate to that, does it? When we look closer, we find that it actually means those from royalty came down. Royalty, just like the Egyptians saw Mars, just like the Egyptians embodied Mars and somehow seemed to imitate as much as possible with their structural layout. How this was actually done, we can only speculate, and we might have to accept the fact that we might not even be capable of the kind of speculation, considering the long years of mundane programming we have been force-fed. So to throw out a speculative theory, and I mean, just have God have mercy on the comment section, please. You know, it was fun about doing that little symbol there is you, the viewer, have no idea if I mean that sincerely or if I'm just trying to piss off the 11% of you or whatever that would take offense to it. But this is fun. But it seems as if Mars has a tie in with the Anunnaki. We are not saying that the Anunnaki were evolved on the planet Mars and then jumped to Earth after a war. As easy as that would be, it seems to be far more complicated than that. We don't know where these Anunnaki figures came from, but we do associate the Anunnaki with an extremely masculine type energy, you know, left brain and logical. The same as Mars is seen in pretty much every culture, despite Egypt considering them royalty. And we also know that the Anunnaki had a hierarchy of royalty. It makes me wonder if whatever the goal of the Anunnaki was, which was not necessarily kind to humans, nor is the mythology of Mars, as we have covered, it makes me wonder if to achieve that goal, they needed a sterile laboratory in order to create their genetic hybridization project. And Mars might have been the perfect environment for that. But as things began to get out of hand, as they often do when you play God, obviously we were encoded with the divine spark that is now laying dormant within most of us, that it can only be woken up through particular spiritual practices like Kundalini and whatnot. But the Anunnaki, I guess, for whatever reason, either forgot to take that part out of our genome, our DNA, or it was woken back up by Enki/Oannes, who went out of their way to make sure that we found the divine spark within us, which can be, again, another video on its own. But we were the children of this Enki or Oannes figure. So despite not knowing where the Anunnaki came from, it seems as if they began their project on Mars. Things got out of hand, civilizations were built, solstices were worshipped. In the form of agriculture, the solstice is important. We go off of the solstice and equinoxes to know when to plant our seeds and when to sow. That brings us back to how we often have these teachers of man honing in on agriculture as the most important thing above all else, including mathematics, geometry, and language. But that's just my take on why we see these irrefutable structures on Mars. I might be wrong. If you have 2 cents to lay on me here, please drop it in the comments. I will read them, as long as they're respectful. I realize that there's enough haters out there now that they're gonna just get all pissy that I pronounced their favorite word wrong or got something off that they read 2 months ago and are like, yeah, you go ahead and type your hatred. Feeds the algorithm. It's fine with me. I'm reminded of the words of one of the greatest authors of all time, fiction that ironically is, of Arthur C. Clarke. There can be little reasonable doubt that ultimately we will come into contact with races more intelligent than our own. That contact may be one way, through discovery of ruins. It may even be face to face, but it will occur. And it may be the most devastating event in the history of mankind. Considering modern science, finding that the warm and wet period of the Martian landscape being quite brief, it is hard to imagine that an advanced civilization of people organically grew and evolved there, unless there was something going on underground, like Agartha. But let's keep it reeled in for now, as we're coming to the end of the video here. But this message or warning, whether it be intentional or not, is clear. Shit happens to the Earth's surface often, and we don't have much control over that. But what we do have control over is the very thing that can kill an entire planet. So let's take heed and let's not make the same mistake again.
From which you came, you shall return, but not in vain. Through truth, the multamed, you shall return unnamed. need for repair. Here on the edge of the pine, our mind is trapped in this cube named despair. Illusion halls built at night. When truth is power, both trees prelude the tower. But truth is sour. Devour, swallow, digest and process it. Your growth will be slow. But you're Glow within the coals. Rushing fast from the treetops. Above the body's goals. Still grounded by the language of blood. We read what's inside. I'll live my own life. Just to take it. I'll breathe without air. I'll consume of the fruits. I'll drink of the waters of life in the land of death. Buried in open space for any to inhabit. Careless upon the river's surface for fish to inquire. Consistent